All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Roy. I'm Director of Cataloging Metadata and Digitization Services here at the University of Minnesota and a member of the DPLA Outreach Working Group. And I am very pleased that you are all here today for the webinar entitled Curated Digital Content, Tools for Teaching, led by Greta Bahnemann, Metadata Librarian for the Minnesota Digital Library. Before we begin, just a little bit about Greta. Greta Bahnemann is the Metadata Librarian for the Minnesota Digital Library, a position she has held since 2010. At MDL, Greta is responsible for implementing current metadata standards and best practices, spearheading the MDL primary source set program, creating online exhibits and learning modules, and the implementation of their standardized rights statements. Greta holds an MA from the Winterthur Program in Early American Culture and an M.L.I.S. from the University of British Columbia at Vancouver. She will be presenting again on curated digital content, and we ask that you hold your questions until the end. And with that all said and done, I'd like to take this opportunity to say, welcome, Greta. Please take it from here.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Today, I will be presenting, as Jason said, curated digital content tools for teaching. The focus of this presentation is on making digital content more accessible via different kinds of curated content, and I will be sharing a number of different projects with you today. Here is our agenda. First, I will provide an overview of some of the work I've been doing with the Minnesota Digital Library, including the Primary Source Sets program, which I developed and modeled after the DPLA Primary Source Sets, and also the History Day Resources exhibit, which I launched last year, and which we have recently updated to include more information on this year's theme. I will also highlight some of DPLA's resources that are relevant to today's conversation, and then I will share some ideas for teachers and students on saving and using primary source materials with greater confidence. And finally, we will have some time for questions. But first, let me tell you a little bit more about the Minnesota Digital Library. We are a statewide aggregate of 202 cultural heritage nonprofit organizations. Our partners come from all over the state of Minnesota and include museums, colleges and universities, archives, county historical societies, public libraries, clubs, and other nonprofit organizations. The MDL collection includes photographs, postcards, letters, diaries, journals, atlases and maps, architectural drawings, oral histories, and much more. And as Jason mentioned, I've been the Metadata Librarian with MDL since 2010. And in that time, I have been a part of a number of changes and new initiatives, including the metadata preparation work we undertook to become part of DPLA when DPLA launched in 2013. MDL is proud to be one of DPLA's 6 original service and content hubs. And in the years since, we have continued to work closely with DPLA on various projects. My coworkers and I have served on a number of DPLA committees. My colleague Molly Huber was a member of the Rights Working Group for a number of years, and I also served on the Metadata Working Group. So now really getting into things, this slide, I always like to start with this slide because I think this slide really explains how I see digital collections and their growth. It is thinking about and answering what I call the 3 big questions. I developed this set of questions many years ago for a course I was teaching. And now I think of these questions as a sort of professional guidepost for when I talk about developing and building digital collections. And they are, what are you digitizing and why? Who is the intended audience for these materials? And finally, how are you going to connect this digitized content with that intended audience? In my mind, the answers to these questions should drive much of the work we do in building digital collections. And the answer to the last question is key to what we are talking about today. Creating curated digital content in its many various forms is one way to connect digital content users and their needs. As I see it, this is the future of digital collection work. It is vitally important that we create and build digital collections to preserve and share fragile analog materials, but it is also equally important that we find ways to engage users with these collections. And curated content is a key part of this, especially as we continue to digitize more and more things, hundreds and thousands and now even millions of items. And curated content can help users make sense of this vast number of resources that are available to them. So this is my slide where I talk a little bit about some of our inspiration. Much of what we have done at the Minnesota Digital Library has been informed by the work of the Digital Public Library of America. Our primary source sets are modeled after DPLA's primary source sets. And while we don't actually have a feature called M.L.I.S, we have added tools for downloading images and creating citations within our records. And we are also currently creating a set of online exhibits. And I like to think that the patent medicine exhibit that I created for DPLA was a number of years ago was our proof of concept for creating online exhibits. And we have currently launched 7 exhibits, and we have a few more in development. And this is a project that will continue to grow and expand. And so I think when you look at this slide, you could almost say that our informal motto is what DPLA can do nationally, MDL can try to do locally. Now I'm going to share, well, actually, I should say Jason is going to be very helpful here and share the URL in the chat. So you can follow along with me if you'd like to look at the Minnesota Digital Library primary source sets. And this is the first project that I'm going to be speaking about. And I'm going to try to remember to do this as we go along. For those interested in the technology side of things, we use a template created in Drupal, which was built by Minitex's web developer, Scott Rea. And Scott built this template to resemble DPLA's primary source set template. And the process for building each primary source set is very simple. The template is designed to be filled out, saved, and published in very easy steps. And perhaps most importantly, you cannot publish a set if you have failed to complete any of the required fields, which makes it very intuitive, and the work is just very step by step. And then the template is also very easy to edit and update in the future, and which makes the whole process pretty seamless. So if you're not familiar with primary source sets, let me provide a very quick definition. Primary source sets are online resources on a specific topic that include a topic overview, a set of primary source materials, in this case from the Minnesota Digital Library, paired up with secondary resources that will help users understand the topic. All of the Minnesota Digital Library primary source sets are focused on Minnesota-specific topics, or look at a national or international topic from a Minnesota point of view. Each set includes an overview, and then also with links to materials in the MDL collection, and then links to resources such as websites and databases, which can help users, which gives users secondary resources, which can help them with their understanding of the topic, and also provide some historic context. Primary source sets bring online resources together in new ways for researchers. All of this content exists, in the MDL collection, in databases, on websites, but this is bringing it together in a single place. And we really believe that this can help teachers use primary source materials in the classroom, or help students start to understand what is the difference between primary and secondary resources. So this slide shows you the list of the components of our primary source sets. We have 6 parts to each one of our primary source sets, and beginning with the topic overview, and that is usually 2 to 3 paragraphs written in a single block of text. And there are also links to records from the MDL collection, and then also links to Minnesota links to eLibrary Minnesota resources. And eLibrary Minnesota is a resource that is designed specifically for Minnesota residents and gives them access to magazines, magazine articles, journal articles, newspapers, and encyclopedia articles, as well as an array of AV resources. And this is used widely in the Minnesota classroom situation, and it is also a resource that we share in the primary source sets, but differentiating it from what we call additional resources, because those are resources that are available to everyone, whereas the eLibrary Minnesota resources are just for Minnesota residents. So the additional resources can include things like libraries and museums and other vetted content, as well as print materials such as books and journal articles. We also have included a set of discussion questions and activities for teachers so that they can use things in the classroom. And then finally, our last part of a primary source set is the Think Like a Historian section, which I will speak about more in the next slide. Sorry, I'm having a little, there we go. So, and this is a more recent development. After the primary source program was up and running for a few years, we decided we needed to maybe take a look at it and reevaluate the template we were using. We decided we didn't need to match exactly what DPLA was using, and that we should modify the template to better meet our user needs. So MDL's program assistant, Stephanie Hess, updated the template and created this new section called Think Like a Historian. And the Think Like a Historian section is designed to be more interactive for users and to ask more open-ended questions. The Think Like a Historian section invite users to observe and record what they're seeing, to think about creators, audience, and the larger historical context, and to explore additional online tools, including two important national resources, which are the document analysis worksheets from the National Archives and the worksheet using primary sources that's available at the Library of Congress. And in the next slide, I will show you how this looks So here is a screenshot of the primary source set of one of the primary source sets, and you can see the different sections, the discussion questions and activities, the eLibrary Minnesota resources, those additional resources for research, and you can see that the Think Like the Historian is in the box on the side of the page, and obviously those discussion questions, the activities, and the eLibrary resources, those are all going to change with each individual topic. But the Think Like a Historian section actually stays the same for each primary source set. MDL currently has a total of 29 primary source sets. We launched this program in 2016 with 5 sets, and every year since then, we have added a few. And when I started out, I was writing all of them, which was a little overwhelming, but over time we have added many other authors, and we continue to welcome guest authors. And we are currently working on several more primary source sets, including the wild ricing in Minnesota and another format highlight on stereographic images. Now I'm going to switch things up a bit and share some information on our online exhibit program. Online exhibits were a logical progression from our primary source set program, and the proof of concept for this work was the exhibit I did for DPLA a number of years ago on patent medicine. Exhibits allow us to expand on a topic beyond a simple primary source set. We can add multiple sections, add more analysis, and perhaps most importantly, more content from the Minnesota Digital Library collections. And today I will be speaking specifically about the History Day resources exhibit I created. And Jason is going to share the URL to that in the chat. So I created this exhibit to help educators, parents, and students involved with the History Day program. Minnesota has a vibrant History Day program with outreach to the entire state. Much of this work is driven by the Minnesota Historical Society and their staff. They offer help to teachers and students, and they host history hullabaloos at the Historical Society's History Center. And the University of Minnesota also gets involved with History Day in Minnesota. Every year we host what's called a Gopher Baloo, and this is a event where the library staff hosts students and teachers at the UMN libraries, and we can help, and the reference librarians help students conduct research and refine their topic. These outreach events can help students both find and discover primary and secondary resources, and also better acquaint themselves with reference librarians and the help that they can provide. So, given Minnesota's level of commitment to the History Day program, I decided to create the History Day Resources exhibit as what I call a one-stop shop for the array of online resources that are currently available to students and teachers. And for those who are interested in the technology side of things, we use Spotlight to build all of our exhibits. Spotlight is a plugin for Blacklight that adds exhibit functionality to the Discovery interface. And I also want to add that Spotlight is pretty easy to use, and it enables us to create exhibits with these multiple sections and parts, and just much more robust content. And it also allows us to pull in a tremendous amount of content from the MDL collection. So I'm going to take a drink of water here. This slide shows you a list of the History Day Resources exhibits parts. They are: what is History Day, approaching your topic, exploring this year's theme, Minnesota Digital Library Resources, Minnesota Digital Library Collection, eLibrary Minnesota Resources, Minnesota Historical Society Resources, and DPLA Resources. And now I'm going to share a few highlights from the exhibit, and you can see a little bit more about what we've done. So the first slide is what is History Day? And this is essentially the introduction to the exhibit, and it provides an overview of the program for those not as familiar with History Day. And this is often very good for parents if they're looking at this and they can get a little bit more foundational information, or for a student who's just starting out with the History Day program. It includes information on the different contest divisions, the annual contest theme book, which is produced by the National History Day program, and information on the different project categories, which include documentary, exhibit, paper, performance, and website. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, we actually launched this exhibit about a year ago, and this past summer, I realized it needed an update. And I added a new section to the exhibit entitled Exploring This Year's Theme. And this section provides very specific information about the annual theme with information from the National History Day program. And you can see here, this is the screenshot of a video that was produced by Dr. Kathy Gorn, who's the executive director of the National History Day program. And she provides an in-depth explanation of what this year's theme is and what it is all about. And then lower down, the section also provides a general list of topics related, of topic-related ideas from the MDL collection. And by adding this section to the exhibit, I think it adds a lot more functionality to the exhibit, and it will also allow us to annually update the exhibit with information on each year's theme without having to necessarily rework the entire exhibit. So this section of the exhibit, which is focused on the Minnesota Digital Library collections, can help students generate ideas for a History Day project. All of the things that are listed here are things we have content about in MDL, but we created this in a way where students can read about the ideas, but then they must actually go to the MDL collection and actually conduct these searches themselves. They're not necessarily canned searches that they have to actually do the work to learn how to search Minnesota Digital Library. And we subdivided the topic ideas into people, which includes a list of notable Minnesotans related to the topic, as well as groups, including the State Grange of Minnesota, women suffragists, Native American boarding schools, Dakota language materials, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and so on. And then we also have a list of places, which include not only cities and towns, but also places like Fort Snelling, the Iron Range, the Red River Valley, and more. And then finally, we also list some events that we have a lot of materials about in MDL, including things like fires and natural disasters, the 1934 Teamsters strike, information about World War I, World War II, temperance, prohibition, the Northfield Bank raid. And as I said, these are all ideas are just jumping off points to get students interested in searching the MDL collection and also to help them to think about their topic and hopefully to begin to refine their topic. So eLibrary Minnesota resources. I mentioned this resource while talking about primary source sets. And as I mentioned, eLibrary Minnesota is a collection of research databases that can be used by Minnesota residents to conduct research. And as I mentioned, it's only for Minnesota residents, but I should also add, I know many other states have very similar residents that are available to statewide to their state residents. So now I also focused a little bit on the resources available at the Minnesota Historical Society, and we're not Minnesota Historical Society, though sometimes MDL and MNHS are confused, but we do work very closely with each other. And I made the decision to share the MNHS resources here, and again, in an effort to try to bring things together and to not reinvent the wheel. And again, that idea of creating that one-stop shop type of experience for both students and teachers. And I also created a research page to highlight the kinds of things that the Digital Public Library of America has on History Day resources. And again, the goal was just to pull it all together for everyone and just to have it in one place. All right, and I'm now going to speak briefly about some other projects that Stephanie Hess has been working on. We've been so lucky to have her as a project assistant, and she has created an array of materials, including exhibits, primary source sets, and then she also has created a number of maps and timelines for the Minnesota Digital Library. And we like to think of these projects as another form of curated content, another form of digital storytelling that provides new access points, different access points into the collection. And Jason is going to share the links for both timelines and maps. And as I mentioned, this is, these are much more recent, which is partly explains why we maybe don't have as many as we do of the primary source sets or even of the exhibits. And I should also mention, for those interested in the technology side of things, these were created using Timeline.js and StoryMaps.js, and both of those are by the Knight Lab. These tools can help users visualize information in a different way. It's a new way to look at and think about historic content. Timelines are interactive and feature an array of content. We currently have a timeline for Minnesota's colleges and universities for where they're located and when they were founded. We also have a timeline for the history of the city of Duluth. In terms of maps, we use the GeoNames metadata to geolocate things, and our maps include the location of Minnesota's Carnegie libraries. We also have a map of the Mississippi River, which runs through Minnesota, and a really fun postcard map called Wish You Were Here, which features postcards and the messages, the images on the front and the messages on the back. And I should also add that I believe Stephanie has more maps and timelines in development. So come back and visit us for more of those in the coming year. Now, I'm going to speak a little bit about DPLA resources. I've spoken a lot about what MDL has been doing, and I'd like to kind of tie everything together because DPLA also has a number of resources available on their website. As a reminder, DPLA also features primary source sets on a whole array of topics, and they are not in any way hindered by the fact that we are kind of confined to of, about, and in Minnesota. And of course, Digital Public Library of America does not have those kinds of limitations. So their topics include everything from Native Americans, migration, Latino history, labor history, Asian American history, African Americans, women, suffragettes, all kinds of things. And Jason is going to share the link to the DPLA primary source set page, so you can see for yourself the whole array there. And there are literally I believe there's close to 150 different primary source sets. And they also have about 30, I believe it's 32 exhibits also on a wide range of topics, including things like the race to the moon, all kinds of different strikes, the Great Depression, the World War II home front, the development of urban parks, crack cures and self-remedies on patent medicine. That was the exhibit that I mentioned that I had done several years ago. And again, just a whole array of topics spanning a pretty large time frame as well. I also want to share the 8 topic lists that DPLA has created and shared in their browse by topic. And the topics include the Civil War, aviation, baseball, the Civil Rights Movement, food, immigration since 1840, the history of photography, and women in science. And these are all great jumping off places for History Day research projects, exhibits, other classroom projects as well. Now that we've explored a wide range of curated content in both MDL and DPLA, I want to speak a little bit about saving and sharing digital content. DPLA has a feature called M.L.I.S, and in my opinion, I think this is perhaps the single greatest service that DPLA offers to its users. Lists allow users to save and retrieve content, and users can save up to 50 items per list and create and save multiple lists. Lists can be then downloaded into a CSV file, which can then easily be saved into an Excel spreadsheet. And you can see on the far right of the screen that I have created 2 lists. And one of them is of the Winterthur Museum, where I received my master's degree, and that you can see that list currently has 13 items in it. And one of them is for my hometown, which is Maryville, Missouri. And I have 29 items in that list. And here's a closer look at my Maryville hometown list. And individual lists are located under the My List tab. And when you open a list, you can rename it. You can add items, you can remove items from the list, and then you can download it and I have those features circled with red boxes on the screen. And I think the best thing about lists is that they can either be highly personalized and individual, just as my hometown list is, or they can be created for a group or for a project, such as in the classroom for a study topic or research topic, or it can be a list of ideas of things to include in a History Day project. So it is a great way to find, after finding content, it is a great way to save that content and then find it again. And now, taking us back to the Minnesota Digital Library and sharing MDL content, as I mentioned, we don't actually have something called My.Lists feature per se. But when we created a new discovery layer from MDL, we added a number of tools to help users organize and share MDL content. And these include a citation tool for each MDL record. Users can create a bibliographic citation in a number of different citation styles, including Chicago, M.L.I. or Wikipedia. We also have the ability to download images, and an MDL record can be shared via an array of social media tools such as Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, LinkedIn, etc. And finally, users can email and print records. So not a list exactly, but definitely tools to help keep users organized and to find, and again, to save and to retrieve content down the road. And finally, I want to speak very briefly about another type of curated content, adding standardized rights statements to digital collections. MDL has been actively working with our partner organizations to assign rights statements to their collection items for the past 4 to 5 years or so. And when a standardized statement has been assigned, it can help students and teachers use digital primary source materials with greater confidence. So knowing that something is not in copyright, it is definitely something where, you know, that is something where you can say, oh, I can use this for a project and not have to worry about violating copyright. So right statements can also direct users to content that they can use, reuse, and share in various forms. And so to conclude, I just want to say we build digital collections to preserve analog content and provide access to the content. And I think we can all agree that that is a worthy endeavor. But in my mind, building tools and resources to connect users to that content is just as important. Digital collections will only continue to grow. And as they grow, we do risk overwhelming and frustrating our users. And I think we will need to devote time and resources to creating curated digital content project and resources to help our users make sense of these collections so that they will be excited, interested, and engaged with the digital collections that we have built. So thank you very much. And now we will have some time for questions.
Thanks, Greta. I'm monitoring the chat and the Q&A, so please feel free to use either for your questions. Greta, I'll ask a question just to kind of kick things off
absolutely.
too. All right, so I'm Ann Hanlon from University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee Digital Collections. And with your primary source sets, what do you find either for teachers or for students is kind of the most helpful aspect of that? What do they use the most or comment on?
I think the things that we have received the most comments on from teachers is this idea that it is so compact, you know, that it's a resource that is very much something that can be digested very, very quickly. You know, it's just a couple of paragraphs, and then it's the content is anywhere from about 10 to maybe 30 items from MDL collections. So it's not something that needs a tremendous amount of time to process. It's something that can be looked at and read and worked through relatively quickly. And that is something that's important for teachers because, you know, as we all know, they are struggling to find time to do all the things that they need to do. And for our perspective, I think it's been a really fun way to take a topic and then to find things in the MDL collection and to connect those things and to say, hey, you know, we have something on you know, World War I on the home front, or something more unusual that maybe users don't necessarily know about, like whaleback boats, which are these unusual boats that were on Lake Superior about 100 years ago. And so you know, it can be fun because it's also an opportunity for us to kind of jump into the collection and do some exploring and having some fun looking at some of the things.
Cool. Thank you. Well, we've got some questions coming in, it looks like. So the first one is, have you considered linking your sites to sources like the Library of Congress and other national repositories? And I suppose, Tracy, if you could, you know, confirm that they're referring to both MDL and DPLA potentially. She says yes. she means both. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I'm not sure exactly how that would work, but on the other hand, I think that's also one of the great things about you know, creating, you know, resource pages on a given website. You know, that I'm pushing people out. You know, when we create primary source sets, we're pushing users out to other resources online, and you know, including that primary source worksheet from the Library of Congress and the National Archives resources. And so we are making those kinds of connections online. And I would, if there was ever an opportunity where the Library of Congress said, yeah, we would love to host, locally created content, I think we would be very interested in that. So.
Cool, thanks. And Tracy, also just to add, the DPLA itself includes collections from the National Archives, not the Library of Congress. That's in its own separate repository, but just FYI, you can find those materials there. We've got another question. This is more technical. Are your Drupal templates able to reuse items directly from MDL's content DM? Or are you saving / storing the digital assets elsewhere for reuse?
Comes directly from Content DM. There's a field where you just put the URL for the record in Content DM, and then I do have to save a thumbnail image, and I just use Snagit to capture an image, and then I upload the thumbnail. You put the URL in, and then you do the alt text for the image using the title metadata, and it's just I can't speak enough about how easy it is to use, and it's just step by step, and you just keep adding content, saving it, and then you publish it, and it's very, very simple.
Cool. I got another question. What guides some of the choices you make with regards to curating content and primary source sets?
It's an excellent question, and I think it's one where it is a balance between things that people are interested in and what we have content in the Minnesota Digital Library. So I'm in a kind of a funny example of that is, somebody asked me once why we didn't have, materials on, I can't remember what topic it was. And it was like, well, very simply, it's because we don't have anything on that topic in the Minnesota Digital Library, because our primary source sets are built from MDL content. So MDL content, we have to have the content in order to build a primary source set or an exhibit, so it's really building with our collection materials. But, going forward, if we had a contributing organization, say we have the set of materials on a given topic, and we'd really love to include them in MDL, and then after they're up in the collection, I would like to write a primary source set, or I'd like to be part of an exhibit team, we would very much welcome that, because that is a great, that would be something that we would be very excited about, because it's, a way to grow the collection, but then also to grow these resources as well.
All right, cool. Let's see, another question. I think she's commenting on the information you've given today. So she was thinking of ways to have those other materials serve as secondary resources, providing additional information for students while highlighting these other holdings. So I think referring to those, linking out to other repositories. So thanks for today's information. Let's see. Okay, but I do have another question. Have you considered linking your primary source sets with the Minnesota learning standards that they meet or that they address? For example, the social studies standards.
I think that would be great. And I think that's definitely on our list of things to do down the road, that we would love to work more closely with teachers and work more closely with the standards, and find ways to do that, and possibly work with some teachers to really enhance that part of the program.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. I don't have any more open questions right now. Anybody else have questions for Greta? Or any comments on either work you're doing with your collections or with your students, depending on where you sit in the audience? Just give it a second, see if anybody else comes in.
Be shy.
Yeah, this was a good set of questions. So. And I am interested in how you're building the template. So the question about, how you're including items from, in your case, Content DM. And so it is, so your template is built really exclusively to include items just from your Content DM instance, or can you include other kinds of?
That is I think that's, you could look at that as both an advantage or a disadvantage, but I think we kind of see it as an advantage that both the primary source sets and the exhibits are the way we are building this, we are only using content from our collection. So, and I think there have been times, especially with the exhibits, where we think, oh, it would be nice to use something else, but at the same time, it does force us to find things in the collection and to use those. So
yeah, that makes sense. We all put a lot of work into these things, huh?
yeah, exactly.
You know,
and I don't know, and if down the road that might be something, that changes. I think that would be something we would have to discuss and kind of mull over and think about, is there way to include things from from DPLA or I'm not sure exactly how that would work. So
sure. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions in the Q&A or in the chat. So I'm not sure who's wrapping things up here. If anybody has any announcements or anything to add before we wrap up today's webinar.
I don't think so, Anne. I think that's it. And I just want to say thank you to Greta. This was fantastic.
Well, thank you. I had so much fun, and I'm so glad all of you could join me. And if you have any questions about any of the projects that I'm working on or any of the things that I've mentioned in the presentation, don't hesitate to reach out and drop me an email, because I'd love to hear from you. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.